Te Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srimad Bhagavatam, Grantaraj Ki Jai. So we're reading the 4 nutshell verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam. The whole Bhagavatam is based on these 4 verses. Therefore, if we can understand these 4 verses, we understand the whole Bhagavatam itself. And what are these 4 verses about? That's explained right before the 4 nutshell verses. And it says, number 1, the one we're on now, what are the forms of the Lord, both in matter and in transcendence? That's what we're studying now. What are the forms of the Lord when He appears in the material world? And what are the forms of the Lord that are eternally manifest in the spiritual world? And secondly, how are the different energies of the Lord working? And number 3, how does the Lord play with His different energies? And number 4, how may Brahma be instructed to discharge the duty entrusted to him? These are the summary of the 4 nutshell verses of the Bhagavatam. Okay, so we stopped at this point where it says, the impersonalist adduces no activity in the Supreme, but in this discussion between Brahma and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Lord is said to have activities also. So the word adduce, you probably don't know what it means. I didn't know what it meant either. But of course I looked it up on the dictionary, and adduce means to cite as evidence. So the Mayavadis, who are complete nonsense, they try and give evidence that the Lord does not have activity, and that the Lord does not have a body, and that the Lord, when He seems to appear in the material world, appears in a material body, just like our material bodies. So all the things that they're trying to give evidence for are bogus. Therefore, we should never listen to the lectures of Mayavadis, because they're giving fake evidence that Krishna is a mundane person. Therefore, they're the worst people who insult Krishna with their nonsense. And so it says, the impersonalist adduces no activity in the Supreme. What? You read Srimad Bhagavatam, it's all about Krishna's transcendental activities going on eternally. So now you see how vicious the Mayavadis are. They're trying to give evidence that he doesn't act at all. And so it says, so the impersonalist adduces no activity in the Supreme, but in this discussion between Brahma and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Lord is said to have activities also, as he has his form and quality. The Bhagavatam is all about the activities of the Lord. How can you say he has no activities? You see? That's how crazy these people are. They are trying to convince you that the Lord has no activity at all. He doesn't have a body. In other words, if I say that Srinivas Prabhu, he doesn't have a body, what you're seeing here is not anybody. He doesn't actually exist. What? I can see him right now. He's smiling. That's an activity, right? So how can you say such things about a human being? That's insulting. They say this about Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's the worst insult you can give him, right? And therefore it says but in this discussion, in this part of the Bhagavatam, 2nd Canto, 9th chapter, in this discussion between Brahma and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, so Lord Brahma is talking to Krishna, and Krishna is talking to him. The Lord is said to have activities also, as he has his form and quality. Not only he has activities, he has an eternal form, and he has eternal qualities. The activities of Brahma and other demigods during the maintenance of the creation are to be understood as the activities of the Lord. The king or the head executive of a state may not be seen in the government offices, for he may be engaged in royal comforts. Yet it should be understood that everything is being done under his direction and everything is at his command. The personality of Godhead is never formless. Now, look at what's being said. The Mayavadis are denying the existence of Krishna by saying he doesn't have a form. And how do we know that? Well, I'm sure you have all heard Mayavad philosophy, especially in India. That is the, let's say, the place where this whole thing started anyway. And they always say, Nirakar, Nirakar, Nirakar. What does that mean, Nirakar? What do you say? You know what that means. What does it mean?
No form. God has no form.
Yeah. Have you ever heard them speak like that?
Oh, yeah.
Huh? Have you ever heard them speak like that, bro? Nirakar?
One time a person, it was before COVID, you were giving the Ishopanishad lecture. And,
Take the microphone, it's right there. One time I was giving a lecture on Ishopanishad.
So a couple of years ago, you were giving a lecture on Ishopanishad, and there was this family, complete Mayavadi family. That person,
The father.
Yeah, the man. Yeah. So after hearing your lecture, and I think you were giving a mantra too, where Prabhupada explains when Mayavadis say that it is Nirakar, Nirguna, God does not have a form like how we have a material form like this, but it's a transcendental form. So despite hearing that man was, denying the fact that God has no form. And then you went very heavy on him. That was the first time I saw you going heavy on anybody, because he was insulting Krishna, and you could not tolerate that.
Right in the temple.
Yeah, right in the
front of
temple.
Krishna.
Yeah, you could not tolerate that. Yeah.
Yeah, I chastised that guy. I remember that.
And I haven't seen him after that in the temple again.
Well, because he is Nirakar. Yeah. He is Nirakar, not Krishna. Yeah. So, what we're doing is studying the activities and qualities of Krishna. That's called the science of Krishna. And here, at least 95% of the gurus in India are preaching Nirakar. In Bharat, the place where Krishna appeared, where Lord Rama appeared, they're teaching people Nirakar. Just imagine how crazy this is. And nobody's complaining about it. They hear it and they say, oh, that makes sense. What? How do you mean that makes sense? So what are they saying exactly? They're saying that they have something that Krishna doesn't have. They have a body. They have a mind. They have senses. They have qualities. And they're all talking about nirakar, nirakar, nirguna, nirguna. You see, this is really vicious, nasty stuff. That's why there's so many problems in India. Because of this false propaganda that's been made for a very, very long time, and it's still going on today. Therefore, how can you expect that Bharat, the land where Lord Ramachandra and Lord Krishna manifested their pastimes, is going to be a successful place? It's failing. Why? Well, Prabhupada has made his attempt to help people, and there's a wonderful attempt in India now to establish the real, let's say, knowledge of who Krishna is, with massive book distribution and massive preaching that's going on every day. So, at least the Christians believe, they think Jesus is God, but Jesus had a body, right? He had qualities, right? At least they believe that. The Muslims, they're a little bit more Mayavad, but still they believe that there's a God, right? And that he is all powerful. So, but the Hindus, most of them don't believe God has a form. And they're teaching it. Just like I showed you that brochure of the Arya Samaj. They clearly say God has no form. And they teach that to their kids. You see how vicious that is, right? And they claim to believe in God, but they clearly say God has no form. Okay, so here, what is Prabhupada saying here? What is this first verse of the Bhagavatam saying? Aham eva asam eva gre nanyad yat satasat param paschad aham yad etach cha yo vasishyeta sosmi aham. Krishna says, Brahma, it is I, the personality of Godhead, who was existing before the creation, when there was nothing but myself, nor was there the material nature, the cause of this creation. That which you see now is also I, the personality of Godhead. And after annihilation, what remains will also be I, the personality of Godhead. So, he's saying, I am a person, and I am existing eternally in my transcendental form. Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. Brahma is saying it. Brahma says, he quotes this verse, Ishvara Parama Krishna. That Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead and the controller of everything and the origin of everything. Satchitananda Vigraha. He has a body. Vigraha means he has a body. But it's not a mundane body, it's a transcendental body. And Anadir Adir Govinda, he's never born, and he's never going to die. He has an eternal form. And Sarvakarana Karanam, he's the source of everything. That's the definition of who God is. He's the source of everything. Every one of us are part and parcel of Krishna. We all have bodies, that's because he has a body, right? If he didn't have a body, we wouldn't have a body. So what the Mayavadis are saying is so wrong. It's unbelievable that people can believe it. They all have bodies, but the Mayavadis try and convince you that this body doesn't exist. What? What do you mean it doesn't? When I went to the dentist today, I found out my body exists. The dentist was causing so much pain in my mouth, right? That means it exists, right? I can't say, oh, this is not happening. Of course it's happening. It's happening, right? I can feel it. Right? So basically, people are, what Mayavad philosophy says is that the human being is superior to God because God has no form, no qualities, but we have form and we have qualities. Then they try and convince you that you don't exist really, and that these qualities and forms are all Maya. So then, what does that mean? That means that this whole material world doesn't exist? What do you mean it doesn't exist? If you tell me the world doesn't exist, I can get a table and hit you over the head with it. Then tell me that it doesn't exist. See, this is all nonsense, but yet people believe it, right? So we have to become convinced of this. Krishna is actually talking with Brahma here, and he has a form and he has qualities, and the activities of Brahma and the other demigods during the maintenance of the creation are to be understood as the activities of the Lord. The king or the head executive of state may not be seen in the government offices, for he may be engaged in royal comforts, while Krishna is engaged in his transcendental pastimes with his devotees in the spiritual world. But at the same time, through his expansions, he's creating, managing, and eventually dissolving the material creation. He's the source of all the jivas, and the jivas have eternal souls. We are all part and parcel of Krishna. Yet it should be understood that everything is being done under his direction and everything is at his command. The personality of Godhead is never formless. In the material world, he may not be visible in his personal form to the less intelligent class of men, and therefore he may sometimes be called formless. But actually, he is always in his eternal form in his Vaikuntha planets, as well as in other planets of the universes as different incarnations. The example of the sun is very appropriate in this connection. The sun in the night may not be visible to the eyes of men in the darkness, but the sun is visible wherever it has risen. That the sun is not visible to the eyes of the inhabitants of a particular part of the earth does not mean that the sun has no form. In the Brihad Aranyakya Upanishad 1.4.1, there is the hymn, Atmai Vedam Agra Asit Purusha Vidha. This mantra indicates the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, even before the appearance of the Purusha incarnation or the Vishnu incarnations, his expansions. In the Bhagavad Gita 15:18, it is said that Lord Krishna is Purushottama, because he is the supreme Purusha, the supreme enjoyer, transcendental even to the Purusha Akshara and the Purusha Kshara. So Akshara means perfect persons who have attained perfection in Krishna consciousness, and Purusha Kshara, those who are still in the material world. The Akshara Purusha, or the Mahavishnu, throws his glance over Prakriti, or material nature. But the Purushottama existed even before that. The Brihad Aranyakya Upanishad therefore confirms the statement of the Bhagavad Gita that Lord Krishna is the supreme person, or Purushottama. So Krishna is the source of Mahavishnu, Garbhodakshay Vishnu, Shirodakshay Vishnu. So he is never subject to the influence of the modes of material nature, and even his plenary expansions, like the Vishnu expansions, are also not subject to the influence of the modes of material nature. In some of the Vedas, it is also said that in the beginning only the impersonal Brahman existed. However, according to this verse, the impersonal Brahman, which is the glowing effulgence of the body of the Supreme Lord, may be called the immediate cause, but the cause of all causes, or the remote cause, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Lord's impersonal feature is existent in the material world because by material senses or material eyes, the Lord cannot be seen or perceived. One has to spiritualize the senses before one can expect to see or perceive the Supreme Lord. But he is always engaged in his personal capacity, and he is eternally visible to the inhabitants of Vaikuntha Loka, eye to eye. So in the material world, at the present moment, we may not be able to see Krishna, just like you don't see Jeff Bezos right now. You don't see Elon Musk. You don't see Bill Gates, but they're present. And how do you know they're present? Because they are managing these big, big companies, and they're everywhere present in these companies in the sense that it's their their strategy that is being followed. But they are in the Bahamas, under the sun, enjoying the warm weather, and we're here freezing, working our butts off. So there's an example to give you right there. You are under their control. If you're working in Microsoft or Amazon, etc., and they're enjoying, and you're working. So that's Krishna. He is enjoying always his transcendental pastimes in the spiritual world, but his expansions, as the Vishnu expansions, are managing the whole material creation and organizing the creation and then the maintenance and the destruction. So just like that, Bezos has so many people, and Gates has so many people, and Elon Musk has so many people working for them. I think Musk has over 100,000 employees and so forth. So they are enjoying and getting richer, and you are working very hard and making them rich, right? So Krishna is not an ordinary CEO like these gentlemen, but these gentlemen are proof that the Lord is present everywhere, but yet he is also transcendentally situated in the spiritual world. Okay, so therefore, it says here that in the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad 1.4.1, there is the hymn, Atmai Vedan Agra Asit Purusha Vidaha. This mantra indicates the Supreme Personality Godhead Krishna even before the appearance of the Purusha incarnation or the Vishnu incarnations. In the Bhagavad Gita 115.18, it is said that Lord Krishna is Purushottama because he is the Supreme Purusha, the Supreme Enjoyer, transcendental even to the Purusha Akshara and Purusha Kshara, and that is the Vishnu incarnations. The Akshara Purusha or Mahavishnu throws his glance over Prakriti or material nature. But the Purusha existed even before that. The Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad therefore confirms the statement of the Bhagavad Gita that Lord Krishna is the Supreme Person, Purushottama. Well, where does he say that? That is in the 15th chapter, the last verses, where it says, Yomam evam samudo janati purushottamam sasarvavid bhajate mam sarvabhavena bharata. Whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality Godhead without doubting is the knower of everything. He therefore engages himself in full devotional service to me, O son of Bharata. That's a description of a devotee. The devotee knows that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, not that he has no body, not that there's only Brahman, there's no, and God has no form, blah, 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 all that nonsense. And we know that, and we worship the deity. The Mayavadis do not worship deities. They think it's a waste of time. Right? And he's the knower of everything. He therefore, the devotee engages himself in full devotional service to Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There are many philosophical speculations about the constitutional position of the living entities and the supreme absolute truth. Now, in this verse, 15:19, now in this verse, the Supreme Personality of Godhead clearly explains that anyone who knows Lord Krishna to be the Supreme Person is actually the knower of everything. So, if you teach your kids that Krishna is the source of everything, and if you know about Krishna, the science of Krishna, you know everything. They don't teach that in school. They don't teach that on the television and the movies. They're teaching it. By the way, every movie now has guns in it. And there's killing. And in the advertisement of the movies, you see people with guns. Now, on the other hand, Joe Biden said, guns are evil. What? Why do you say they're evil when every movie has guns in it? And every movie you see death all the time. In video games for kids, in movies, adults go to these movies that are more and more violent and more sexual. And the President of the United States was saying guns are evil. Then why do you allow the movies to have so many guns in them? See? You see how crazy things are. On one hand, they're bad. We have to outlaw them. On the other hand, they're being glorified in the movies, right? Even in the Bollywood movies nowadays, there's guns all the time. There's shooting, there's killing, right? That's called entertainment. How can that be entertainment when you see people being killed? What kind of entertainment is that? You see how screwed up this culture has become. Okay, so it says, the imperfect knower goes on simply speculating about the absolute truth, but the perfect knower, without wasting his or her valuable time, engages directly in Krishna consciousness, the devotional service of the Supreme Lord. So we see someone like Rasavati, she's spending all her time engaged directly in Krishna consciousness, right? She's not diverting from it. So that's what happens when you believe that God is a person and he has qualities and he's the source of everything. Her guru convinced her of that, and she surrendered, and now the rest of her life, she's been, and for so many years now, she's working only in Krishna consciousness. Right? And that's what this verse says. It says, whoever knows me, meaning Krishna, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, without doubting, is the knower of everything. He or she, therefore, engages himself or herself in full devotional service to me, O son of Bharata. We're seeing a person like that right in front of our eyes, right? But do we understand what she's doing? Maybe, maybe not. But today, we're celebrating her birthday. But what is a real birthday? The day she got initiated. You have two births. Your seminal birth from mother and father, and your spiritual birth from Guru and initiation. So what does that mean, your spiritual birth? That means you go back to who you actually are. You're the eternal servant of the Lord. In the material concept, we're the eternal servant of Bezos and Gates and this one and that one. But when you're spiritually born, you're the servant of Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We have to understand the difference. Both ways you're working. But one type of work is useless, and it leads to repeated birth and death. And the other type of work is liberating and leads to eternal existence in the spiritual world. Both ways we're existing, but one is in misery and the other is in bliss. So you take your choice, which one you want. You want to be miserable all the time in different births, like rats and snakes and elephants and giraffes and microbes and human beings, or you want to be eternally blissful in the spiritual world as a servant of the Lord. Service of the Lord means you're liberated. Service of these greedy CEOs or owners of big businesses means you're in ignorance and you're suffering. So you choose who you want to serve in life. So therefore it says, throughout the whole Bhagavad Gita, this fact is being stressed at every step. What is that? It says, the imperfect knower goes on simply speculating about the absolute truth, but the perfect knower, without wasting his or her valuable time, engages directly in Krishna consciousness, the devotional service of the Supreme Lord. Throughout the whole of Bhagavad Gita, this fact is being stressed at every step. And still, there are so many stubborn commentators on Bhagavad Gita who consider the Supreme Absolute Truth and the living entities to be one and the same. It's unbelievable how this is happening, but it's happening every day. The Arya Samajis are teaching it, and all the fake gurus are teaching it, and they're teaching it to children. Your children sometimes, right? And these Mayavadis have caused havoc in society. And it's still going on. It hasn't stopped. In fact, it might even be increasing. Right? Vedic knowledge is called Shruti, learning by oral reception. That means you learn, Shruti means you learn by hearing, just like you're hearing right now. We're hearing what Prabhupada is saying about Krishna and what Krishna is saying about himself. Who else can be a bigger authority on Krishna than Krishna himself? And he says here that whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead without doubting is the knower of everything. He therefore engages himself in full devotional service to me, O son of Bharata. So that means Radhasavati knows and has faith that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, 24 hours a day she's engaging in Krishna's service and thinking about Krishna and talking about Krishna and glorifying the Lord. She has understood Krishna. She's not some big pundit. She is a gigantic devotee. There's a major difference between the two. Okay, Vedic knowledge is called Shruti, learning by oral reception. You learn Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam by hearing it. That's called oral reception. One should actually, now, O-R-A-L and A-U-R-A-L are pronounced exactly the same. What does O-R-A-L mean? You know what it means?
Oral means just speak from the...
Right, just speaking, right? What does A-U-R-A-L, pronounced oral, what does that mean? What? You don't know? Huh? How old are you? How old are you now? 48 years, and you don't know the difference between oral and oral. Look it up. Learn this tonight. No, wait a minute. Let him look it up. How many of you know the difference before you hear this now? How many of you knew the difference between oral and oral? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. You see? You see why it's important to come to class. Otherwise you don't know the difference between oral and oral. What does it say, Prabhu? A-U-R-A-L.
Relating to the ear or the sense of hearing.
Did you know this? That they're both pronounced the same way. O-R-A-L and A-U-R-A-L. But A-U-R-A-L means how you hear. And O-R-A-L means how you speak. There's some big difference between the two, right? So here it's saying that Vedic knowledge is called Shruti. Shruti means learning by oral reception, A-U-R-A-L. Hearing, learning.
Not Shruti, but I didn't know that. Oral.
That's why we're talking, okay? That's why I asked the question, do you know the difference between oral and oral? You say, well, what difference is it? It's pronounced the same way. No, there's a big difference. Gigantic difference. So, you learn from oral reception, not by reading necessarily, but by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam spoken by genuine devotees. One should actually receive the Vedic message from authorities like Krishna and his representatives. Here, Krishna distinguishes everything very nicely, and one should hear from this source. Simply to hear, like the hogs, meaning pigs, is not sufficient. One must be able to understand from the authorities. It is not that one should simply speculate academically. One should submissively hear from the Bhagavad Gita that these living entities are always subordinate to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Is that what the Mayavadis are teaching, that we're always subordinate? No. They say at one point you become. Atma becomes Paramatma. That's what they're teaching. Atma becomes Paramatma. Now, do you believe that? Well, if you're an idiot, yes, you believe that. But if you're a devotee, you say, no, that's nonsense. I don't believe that. How can I be, I'm passing stool and urine. How can I be Paramatma? Right? By the way, what did I say was one way to prove, one way to know whether someone is God or not God? you tell them to drop their pants right away and pass stool, right? And then you smell the stool, and if it smells like crap, you know they're not God. Because God, or Rishabhadev, his stool was fragrant, right? Or you can ask him to show their universal form, like Krishna did to Arjuna. See, there's many ways to prove someone is not God, is a fake. If you ask, if you go on Doordarshan, you ask, will the real incarnation of Krishna please stand up? How many people would stand up in India? What do you think? What do you think, sir? How many people would stand up in India? If you ask the question on the television, can the Supreme Personality of Godhead stand up? How many people do you think would stand up? How many people are saying they are God in India? Of course. So they become convinced by hearing Mayavad philosophy. Yeah. Okay, so therefore it says, it is not that one should simply speculate academically. One should submissively hear. That means with humility you should hear Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam spoken by genuine devotees. Submissively hear from Bhagavad Gita that these living entities are always subordinate to the Supreme Personality of God. In other words, there's no such thing as Atma becomes Paramatma, which is what they're teaching, right? The Mayavadis. Anyone who's able to understand this, according to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, knows the purpose of the Vedas. No one else knows the purpose of the Vedas. So these so-called Vedantis, they're not Vedantis. They don't know what Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, or the truth is. They're making things up, illusory things, and misleading themselves and misleading people. Okay, so we'll stop right there and continue. I didn't even get to Chaitanya Charitamrita yet. But we started late today and we'll continue tomorrow. Are there any questions? If you learn just what we discussed today, that's enough. So that's enough to go back to Godhead. Yes, sir.
Is important. Why it is important to believe that God has a form, and
well, first of all, do you have a form?
yes.
So if you say God doesn't have a form, you have a form. You're saying you are more, let's say, real than God. No, that's what it means. That means that you have something God doesn't have, but God is the source of everything. So how can you have something that He doesn't have? When you say Ishwara Parama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha Anadiraja Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam, He's the source of everything. And now you're saying, no, he's not the source of form. He doesn't have a form. So you're insulting Him by saying that.
Okay, and how to get that conviction, like, the God has a form?
I'll give you the conviction right now. I'm going to take this microphone and bang you on the head to prove to you that you have a form, right? And Krishna has a form also, because you're seeing it right here every day. Why are you coming to the temple? The Mayavadis don't come to the temple. They don't believe God has a form. They think we're wasting our time worshiping the deity. So,
last question. Okay, in my understanding, the Christians, as Christianity as well as Islam, according to them, the God doesn't have form, and even though they have Jesus, but according to them, Jesus is the Son of the God, not God Himself.
If you say Jesus is, see, the Muslims reject that Jesus is the Son of God, because they say God does not have sex. What? That means that, God doesn't have to engage in sex in order to create something. But they've got it wrong. They're saying Jesus is not the Son of God. He's just a prophet. Right? Whereas the Christians, they go too far by saying Jesus is God. they also say he's the Son of God, but then they say he is God himself. So they got it mixed up also, you see. But what we say is, Jesus, we just repeat what Jesus says about himself. He says he's the Son of God. He didn't say he is God, right? But he's as good as God, just like Prabhupada is as good as God because he's the representative of Krishna. But he's not God. But he's as good as God because he's representing, he's teaching us who Krishna is. So there's a difference between being God and representing God. But the same respect is given to the bona fide guru, not the kangaroo, but the bona fide guru, because he's representing God. Just like Rasavati, she learned from her guru that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and we should dedicate our life to serving him. So she believed that. And that's what she's doing. You see? So, but that doesn't mean her guru is the Supreme Personality of God, the incarnation of Krishna. But he's representing Krishna. Therefore, he's given the same respect as Krishna.
Okay. So does it mean the Muslims as well as Christians, they are Mayavadis? So?
That means that they're both Vaishnava religions because they believe in the existence of God, but their understanding of God is not completely right. That's why they're fighting all the time, killing each other sometimes. See?
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah. But both Islam and Christianity is a Vaishnava, let's say Vaishnava type of religion because they believe that there is a God. Right? Yeah.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Adi Shankara is a pioneer of Vedanta philosophy.
What?
Adi Shankara.
Shankaracharya, yes.
He wrote Bhajagovindam. In that,
What does that say, Bhajagovindam? You tell me.
to praise Govinda,
To worship Govinda.
to worship Govinda. But after that, where did it change?
That's because of Sadananda Yogendra,
Okay.
his number one devotee. Sadananda is the number one disciple of Sankaracharya. He wrote the Vedanta Sar, the essence of the Vedanta, and codified Mayavad philosophy.
Okay.
He's the evil guy. His guru tells him, give up all this speculation, Nirakar and so forth, and just surrender to Krishna and worship him, right? And when he said, Bhaja Govindam, right? But Sadananda Yogendra, he doesn't give up speculation. He codified it and wrote it down in philosophy by giving a false interpretation of Vedanta Sutra. So that we were going to get to tomorrow and the next day. That's the next thing we're going to learn about. Why Shankaracharya, his last instruction was Bhaja Govinda, but his disciples, especially Sadananda Yogendra, codified the false interpretation of Vedanta Sutra and created this Mayavad philosophy. Even Sankaracharya said this philosophy that he was teaching would only be valid for 1,000 years. In other words, from the end of Buddha's life to the appearance of approximately Ramanujacharya. But they continued it. Just like animal sacrifice should have stopped at the end in the beginning of Kali Yuga. It was forbidden. But they continued it. The Jews continued it. And the fake brahmanas in India also continued it, you see. So in the same way, Sankaracharya said his philosophy would only be valid for 1,000 years, and it would be replaced by Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, Lord Chaitanya. But they continued it because of Sadananda Yogendra, who gave a false interpretation. Just like we in Krishna consciousness, if we deviate from what Prabhupada has given us, right? Because we think, oh, we have to adapt to modern civilization, and we have to not talk about this thing Prabhupada talked about that, because it won't be accepted today, because the culture has changed, so we have to also change. No, that's not true. Whatever Prabhupada has given us is what the acharyas have given us, and we have to stay faithful to the original, what you would call Siddhanta. Siddhanta is perfect philosophy. So the perfect philosophy is Krishna is a person. He's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Or as it says, is Yomam Evam Samodo Janati Purushottama. He's Purushottama. He's the Supreme Purusha. And no one else is equal to or greater than him. This is the philosophy. Right? This is the Siddhanta. Siddha Anta. Anta means the finality of all Siddha, perfection. Right? And the finality of all perfection is to be the eternal servant of the Lord, because it says here, whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead without doubting is the knower of everything. He therefore engages himself in full devotional service to me, O son of Bharata. What are the people doing in the spiritual world? They're fully engaged in devotional service to the Lord. So whether you get fully engaged in service to the Lord in this world or in the spiritual world, you are a liberated person. You're no longer going to be subject to birth, death, old age, and disease. But yet, all these big Mayavadis, they all die. Right? And they all take birth again. So, you want to be a Mayavadi and stay eternally in the material world? Go ahead. You want to become liberated from this material world and go back to where you came from, the spiritual world? Engage full-time in devotional service to the Lord, under the influence of bona fide gurus. You want to be under the influence of bona fide kangaroos? That's your choice. Kangaroo or guru, you have to decide who you want to follow. Now, there are more kangaroos than gurus, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, we'll stop right there, unless there's another question, and continue tomorrow. Hari Bol. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.